Hello, Kansas and Western fans. Sorry for the late hour to get this video posted today, but I was not exactly the master of my own fate today. Just had a lot of things we had to do to get ready for a birthday party tomorrow, and that took precedence over doing this video, and that's just fine. But I'm doing it now. So anyway, in reference to the title about using Google Earth to plan my layout, I've been wanting to do this video for quite a while because it does a good job, or it will do a good job, of explaining the inspiration for a lot of the scenes on my layout. And I'm going to explain to you how I use Google Earth to come up with that. But first of all, what I started out with when I was planning the layout for this room is, obviously I knew the square footage of the room, right? Everybody's going to know that. And what I did at that point was I planned out some major portions, I guess, of the layout. That being a large yard here for Wichita, and another rail yard here behind me for La Junta. And once I figured out where I was going to put those, and then once I figured out where I was going to put the helices, and here's one here, and then there's one over there below the elevator refinery, then it became a case of how do I fill the space in between those things? And to do that, I used Google Earth to help me figure that out. So to describe how I worked that out, we're going to move into the office really quick, and I'm going to show you that. So I'm going to assume that most of you have used Google Earth at one time or another, whether it's to navigate someplace you're driving or someplace you just want to check out. Here I'm zooming out to show you basically the map of the United States. There it is there. And then zoom back in where I've already selected Canon City, which is one of the key places on my layout. Now, as I mentioned, I started with the rail yards, and we're going to cruise over here to the east of Canon City, and we're going to find La Junta. So that's one of the yards that I wanted to have. And the reason why is this river you see here on this map is the Arkansas River. That's what it's called in Colorado because it was named after a mountain, Mount Arkansas, in Colorado. Well, for some reason, once it crosses over into Kansas right here at Coolidge, it becomes the Arkansas. And I can't explain why. It's a weird Kansas cultural thing. But anyway, I digress. So this route is Highway 50 that runs all the way across Colorado, Kansas, Missouri. I'm not sure how far east it goes, but it's a pretty fairly straight highway across several states. And this is a route that we used when I was with my family traveling, that would travel from Wichita, basically, which is here, and then travel west along 54/50 because it changes names once or twice, I think. And I always remember driving past La Junta as a kid, looking out the window and seeing this rail yard, which you can see I'm zooming in here, and there it is. There's the highway, and here's the yard. And we're going to use our little drop a guy places thing, street view, and take a look at that. So here's the yard, here's the highway in the foreground, and so the yard is the full length of the highway, and you can see a couple BNSF locomotives there pulling a unit coal train. And so as a kid who was a fan of railroads, this was always something that excited me when we get close to La Junta because I'd get to see a bunch of trains. So that was something I had to have on the layout. If the layout is based on my childhood memories of family vacations traveling to Colorado, had to have this. So we're going to talk about the lower level for right now on my layout. Once I figured out that I wanted to have this on the layout, I had to figure out what else I was going to add. And you remember the location of La Junta Yard. There's still quite a bit to the west that I had to model. So I had to figure out, well, what do I want to model to take up all that space? And knowing that I had a helix where I had to hide where the track was going to enter the helix, I thought, well, what better way to hide it than the mountains? And what more scenic mountain area can I include than the Royal Gorge route? So here we have Canon City, and we'll zoom in on that, and that's another feature on the layout. And we'll go ahead and find the station here. Here's the Royal Gorge Railroad. You can see it right there. We'll drop our little guy here, pan him around, and here is the Canon City train station. which I believe is a Santa Fe style. I'm not sure, but once I'd figured out where I was going to put Canyon City, then it became pretty easy to figure out that I was going to include the Arkansas River and the drive along the river. Now, when the tracks initially leave 50, and that's right here where Highway 50 goes north, you can't really see where the tracks go because there's not really any road over there. And so you have to pick it back up where Highway 50 meets up with the river again, which is right up here west of the Royal Gorge itself. And so I remember as a kid when we would take this route over to Monarch Pass, watching the tracks for oncoming trains when I was growing up. And so here is the bridge where it picks up the train or the tracks, and you can see in this picture actually there's the Royal Gorge train. So that was something that was always neat to look for traveling in this area. And so that's how I came up with the design for the rest of that layout west of Canyon City, was remembering this route and what it would look like on the other side. And there's the river, there's the road, and there's the tracks on the other side. They're no longer in use now, but when I was a kid, they were. And every now and then I would get to see a train. And then here you can see how it's just all rock. Now, I've represented rock face because I had limited space to do anything, but this is generally what it looks like in reality. Now, moving east from Canyon City, and we're going to go back to the layout so we don't lose track of what we're talking about here real quick. So just to review, here in my train room, we've got La Junta Yard, and then moving west along the main line is Pueblo and the Alvarez plant, and we'll go back and I kind of skimmed right over that, so we'll go back and touch on that really quick after I do this review. And then we go through the backdrop. We come out the other side of the backdrop, and then we have the Portland cement plant, and I kind of skimmed over that too, so we'll go back over there. And then here you have Canyon City. Here's the train station that I showed you. And then west of Canyon City, where the tracks enter the Royal Gorge area, and then there's the river, and then here's the highway I mentioned. So traveling along the highway, looking across the river, there's the tracks, and there's basically the mountain beyond. And so that's how I came up with this design. And then, like I said, I needed a way to hide the tracks entering the helix. I created that tunnel there. And there is a tunnel on this line, but it's much, much farther away, and it's called Tennessee Pass. It doesn't really look like this. I've seen several layouts that represent it very well, but that was just a handy way for me to hide the tracks entering the helix. But at any rate, that's how I came up with that. So we're going to go back to the yard really quick. All right, we're back at the yard. So now what we're talking about is, what do I model going east of La Junta? So what we're going to talk about now is Lamar, and there's that station there. Here's the seed oil refinery. Whatever this actually is in the real world, there's no signage or anything. I'm calling it a fertilizer distributor here. And then a small grain elevator for Lamar. And then we follow the main line until we reach Holly, which is the last town in Colorado before you get to Kansas. So we're going to show that really quick. All right, since I skipped over a couple things before, we'll touch on that really quick. Again, we're at Canyon City here on Google Earth. When you go back east along Highway 50, which is right here, and you see this kind of gray area, that's the Portland cement plant. And one of these days I'll keep the camera centered on the action. So you can see all the quarrying here that they've done. Here is the plant proper, and if I zoom in on the highway that goes right by the plant, then you'll see what I'm trying to model. And there it is right there. So obviously the model that I have is not that complicated. I can probably add some more to it, but this is basically the plant that goes right by the river. In fact, the river is right here on the other side where you see those trees. Anyway, that's the Portland cement plant. You go back to the east a little bit more, and here you have Pueblo, Colorado. And then on the southeast side of town, where it looks all kind of dirty here, that is the Alvarez steel mill. And there's a lot to it. I think there's some old buildings and whatnot that are out of service. But here are the scrap yards that I'm trying to model. And you can see several different lines all through here, all the different piles of scrap where they're sorting them. And then here is the furnace or the mill itself where they break that down. This is the loading facility that I'm trying to model, and there's much more to this than that. I think in this area here is where they do welded rail at quarter-mile sections, and then down here is the area where you can see where they're tearing up old rail cars. See if I can find it here. Here it is. When you zoom in, you can see piles of rail cars that are getting broken up. And so that's the other area that I'm trying to model. All right, so what we were talking about before I stopped off on this though, was we're trying to move east in reality and model this. And let's get back to La Junta. Hopefully all this map panning isn't making you sick. All right, here we go. Here's La Junta here, right there. So we're looking for Holly, or I actually forgot Lamar. There's Lamar. So in Lamar, what I'm trying to model is you can see the rail line running right through the middle of town. I'm trying to model the east side of Lamar. And we'll start with the train station. Drop our guy right here. So there's the train station here. There's the locomotive that's on display, an old Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe model. I'd love to have room to add this water tank and windmill. I just don't think I do. I think it'll make the scene too crowded. But then here is the rail line. Now, if you go a little bit east of here, this is the seed oil refinery. I can't remember the name right now. And this is the what I'm calling fertilizer distributor. So we'll drop our guy here. And this is kind of the way that I was looking for scenes to model in these areas, is I would follow the tracks and just try to find interesting industries. There's those two silos that I've already built, and I've done basically a half of this building here. And we'll go to the other end of it really quick and show you what it looks like from trackside. We drop our guy here on the crossing more or less. And so here's what we're looking at as we cross the tracks. There's the fertilizer distributor, or what I'm calling it that. And then here is the seed oil refinery here. And then if you look way off in the distance, which I think we've got to get across the tracks a little bit more, you'll see the elevator. And there it is right there. So that's how I decided to put those three things in that area, because in reality, they are actually kind of close together. The trackage is fairly similar in terms of you have a main line that goes down the middle, and then you've got spurs and sidings that feed each. And a little bit farther, and we'll find there's our grain elevator right there. So that's how I came up with the design for that. We'll zoom out a little bit and find Holly, see what it looks like. Oh, we're into Kansas. There's Holly. All right, we're looking for the tracks again. There they are right there. And here is the elevator that I'm trying to model. And we'll drop our guy here and take a look at that. So that's how I found this scene. So this is what I'm trying to model. I've got these 9 tanks here. I still have yet to build this facility, but then I have the main elevator already built. And then on this side is a scale. There's the water tower that I've already added right there. So this is how I've been using Google Earth to get inspiration for doing in reality. And boy, wouldn't this be a cool cloud scene to add. Anyway, I already have the backdrop for that, so we're not going to talk about that. Now we're going to talk about Kansas. So let's go back to the training really quick, and I'll show you what I've been doing there. All right, so here we are back in the training room, and here in the foreground is the Holcomb Power Plant, which I'll show you here in just a minute. And then I use this to kind of segue into Garden City. And these two industries, Midwest PMS and Helena Chemical, are right next to each other. So that works out for the layout, but they're actually west of Garden City. So I'm going to show you that, and then I'm going to show you around the corner here we have Charleston Elevator, which in reality is located east of Garden City. So I'm going to show you that on Google Earth and how I found those things. All right, here we are back at Holly, which is the last town in Colorado before you get to Kansas. And you cross the state line right there. There's a famous sign that you see on the side of the road if you've ever taken this route. And the next major city you get to is Garden City right here. So next to Garden City, we have Holcomb, which I just missed. There it is, Holcomb. And just to the south of Holcomb, you'll see the Sunflower Electric Power Corporation. Now, the issue with this plant is there's not really any public roads that are nearby that you can get a good look at the operation. The closest one, I believe, is here. So we'll drop our guy there and see what we can see. Yeah, that's not very close. So I would say that's maybe a mile away. But you can see the power plant, right? You can see the power plant there. You can see the smokestack. You can kind of see the distribution lines where the trains unload the coal and then it gets moved into the transfer house and then dumped into the piles that you really can't see there at all. So we'll zoom out and take a look at that. So here's the train line coming down here from the main line, and you can see that's the transfer house or the dump house where the coal gets unloaded, and then here's the transfer house and obviously the big coal piles there. So that's what I've represented. And then I didn't want to try to do a downtown major city in Garden City because I'm kind of doing that for Wichita, so I didn't want to copy that. So I tried to find along the rail line somewhere, and you can see how it goes straight across the screen here. That's the rail line. I tried to find some areas in there that would be interesting to model. And the best thing that I found was Midwest PMS and Helena Chemical right next to each other. And I thought that would be handy because I could do two industries that are right next to each other in the real world, and then would also fill that fairly short space on my layout. And so all I did there was found the nearest highway that the Google car had been on, which is right here. And then taking a look at them, this is Midwest PMS, I believe, with its brown tanks. And then right down the way is Helena Chemical. So we'll scoot down the road here a little bit and get a better look at that. And there you go there. So that became really handy for space considerations because in reality they're next to each other. There they are. And it's just a simple siding that serves them both. And that's pretty much the same as on my layout. Here is the main line here, and then here is the service siding with the spurs off to each business there. One there and one up here. Now for Charleston Elevator, I found it by going east of Garden City because, again, on the layout, we're trying to cover some linear space, right? So I didn't want, two different walls to be the same location. So rather than stick around at Garden City, I decided to move east a little bit, cover some ground, and I just started to follow the rail line, which basically parallels Highway 400 here. And I tried to find something of railroad interest that would work for the layout. And that's when I found Charleston Elevator. And this is pretty iconic for Kansas because there's a lot of places along lonely highways where there really isn't anything except for a grain elevator. So we'll drop our guy here and take a look at this. Sorry, my hand's getting kind of shaky because the phone's getting heavy. All right, so here is Charleston Elevator. And there is the main line right there in front of it with a service siding right beside it. There's no rail cars there today, so nothing to look at, but here's the highway. And again, this is another situation where there's not much to see in western Kansas on the family trips to Colorado. So when you're a fan of railroads, you try to spot whatever you can, and this is about it. A long stretch of main line that parallels the highway, and you're just kind of hoping for an industry and hoping for some activity to give you something to look at. So there is that. Now, let's go back into the train room and look at how I handled the Wichita area. All right, so there's Holcomb Power Plant. Here's Midwest PMS and Helena Chemical west of Garden City. Following the main line, here's Charleston Elevator east of Garden City. And then we just kind of have a segue here. There's not really enough space in this curve to do anything, so that's why I decided to make it kind of a recreation area. And then we have this really long wall which sits above La Junta Yard, which is why I chose La Junta Yard to put in this area, because it's a long wall. It's about 16, 17, 18 feet. So what am I going to do with this upper area here? Now, I live in Wichita. I've been from the Wichita area almost my entire life, so of course I'm going to dedicate a lot of time to that. So that's why I decided to use this more narrow space to do several industries, to basically hide the fact that it is narrow and that I can't do a whole lot of trackage because there's not a lot of space to do tracks and industry. And that's why my industries are going to be kind of narrow, because I just don't have a lot of space. And so what I've put here is Star Lumber Distribution Yard and all metal recycling and the Clean Harbors Refining Facility, Advent Mills or Ardent Mills, I'm not sure which one it is now. And down there we have Cargill. Now, this is where you have to make a compromise, right? Because we're working in a linear fashion to cover ground on the layout, but the prototype wasn't designed that way. So I kind of had to pick and choose. So I'm going to show you the reality of how these industries are laid out. And then you'll see how I kind of had to make some choices to make things work. So hang on. All right, we're back in satellite mode or bird's eye view on Google Earth. And centered here in the screen is Charleston Elevator, where we left off. We're going to zoom out quite a bit. I had to cover quite a bit of ground to make it all the way east. And here's Wichita. Now, the rail lines from Charleston Elevator to Wichita don't really exist as a single line anymore. There's a couple smaller lines. The BNSF actually goes up to Hutchinson from there. It doesn't travel to Wichita in this direction. And so I kind of had to use artistic license, I guess, to kind of make that work for my layout. As such, though, I cheated a little bit. Up here on the north side of Wichita is the big rail yard that I've represented on my layout. But the industries that I've chosen to put nearby are kind of spread out all over the place. So actually on the southwest side of town is Star Lumber. Here you have the Wichita Airport, and just to the east of the airport you can see this rail line here, and right in here is the Star Lumber Distribution Yard, and you can see that spur right there. So that's where I used, or this is the industry that I used for that. And then zooming back out, the rest of them I took from areas near the Wichita Yard. So starting back more towards the south, you can see there's all sorts of elevators down here, and we're going to actually cheat and drop off here at I-135. So we can look back to the east, although this is not a good, oh, we're looking east. Here we go. And there's a bunch of trees. Anyway, there's an elevator there. And I find a better place to drop. There we go. Now you can see all kinds of elevators. So some of these elevators are still in commission. I couldn't tell you exactly which ones without driving by them. And so you can see why I would have so many elevators on my layout, because they're a key part of Wichita industry. I think this is the one that's actually Advent or Ardent Mills. I'm not sure exactly which it is, but there's even more down here. I think that one is actually Cargill. So that's why I have so much of this industry type in Wichita, because that's the reality. So to be specific, you've got, let's see if we can find it here. Here's Cargill right here. And then I think up here is Ardent Mills. I think that's it right there. And then up by the rail yard itself, we've got Clean Harbors right there. And then north of that, there's actually several of these, but see if we can find it here. There we go. All metal recycling right there. And you can see the rail line. This is a secondary yard here, And then you can see the spur peel off where all the scrap sorting is and loading of gondolas. And then here you have the massive grain elevator with the yards on both sides. Now in reality, the Union Pacific owns this entire facility here. I've chosen to break it down between the BNSF on the left side here and the Union Pacific on the right, but that's how that looks. And we'll just drop our guy here on the highway bridge so you can see what that looks like. And there you go. So this is the actual bridge that I've modeled at the end of my yard. So let's go back and check out the layout again and get our bearings. So Google Earth, we just left the top of this bridge looking off to the south and west down the tracks towards the elevator. Now those tracks were kind of curving away from us towards the elevator. I had a straight arrow to use. Again, that's artistic license, I guess. And then this is the actual side of the elevator that we saw. This is called the Mop Yard, or Missouri Pacific, because Missouri Pacific used to own this part of the yard before Union Pacific took it over. And even though I'm going off in a different direction, in reality, it's that end of the yard that peels off in two different directions. One goes up to Harrington, Kansas, and off to the right, it goes off towards El Dorado. I had to flip it around to make it work for my room. So this lead that goes off the yard would be the line that goes towards El Dorado. So the next areas we're going to look at on Google Earth is Towanda, the El Dorado oil field, and this particular scene, Shumway Road. I'll show you what that looks like in reality. And then we've got Mears, Barton Solvents, BG Products, and the refinery, and then finally Union Tank Car. So we'll go back over to the office and show you what those look like in reality. All right, here we are back on the bridge looking over at the yard, the mop yard. If you spin your camera around here, you can see where the rail line heads off to the east towards El Dorado. So we'll kick back out to eye level. You can see how it curves off, and this is the line that goes towards El Dorado. We'll zoom out, and you can obviously track the tracks really well to Greenwich, and then straight over here to Benton. And then here is the town of Towanda, where I grew up. In fact, my house used to be right up here on 8th Street, so not very far from the tracks indeed. And you can see from Lion Street, here's the tracks right here. So as a kid, I used to ride my bike down here and watch the trains go by, because you could hear them blow the horn as they were still outside of town, which gave us kids plenty of time to ride our bikes down to the tracks and see what was going on. I actually had the opportunity to see them, see one derail. It was low speed, so it didn't really, I don't think the tracks or the cars tipped over or anything, but we saw what happened and then how it got cleaned up. So that was kind of interesting to see as a kid. All right, so from Towanda, we'll zoom out again. The line continues east towards El Dorado. And before we get to El Dorado, here is all these roads that you see here. This is all oil field road. And all these little marks here are oil pump jacks. So this is a well, an oil well. And you can see the pump jack there. So that's all these little dots that you see everywhere are oil wells and pump jacks. So this is the El Dorado oil field. So the scene that I'm representing, what I'm calling the El Dorado oil field scene, is right here. And you can see this is Shumway Road. We'll drop our guy here. And there's the tracks. And through here, which you can sort of see through the trees, is that tank battery that I built on the layout. There it is right there. So there's the tracks. This is a little communication area for the radio communications for the railroad, and that is El Dorado in the distance. And I'll zoom out again. When we move into El Dorado, here is the rail line again, and then here's Mears Fertilizer. And these are all three fairly close to each other. I'd say they're all within about a mile or two of each other. And you can see the spurs going in here. And then on down the main line, you've got Barton Solvents and They're calling it, that's not it. Here you go. There's BG Products right there. And you can see the tanks. You can see settling ponds or collection ponds for runoff, I'm guessing. There and there at the end. And then you can see our loading racks here with the main line down below, which is pretty much the exact design that I did it. I just did it in reverse because I'm looking at a different direction on my layout. Now from here, that's where things get a little fuzzy again, because that's basically the extent of Union Pacific's responsibility in El Dorado. Now you can see the rail line that comes through town here, and there's actually a small yard that they use here on the east end of town to switch cars and switch positions. But it's actually at the north end of town that is the Union Take Car Company, and the BNSF serves that. So that's this industry here. And then it's the south end of town where the refinery is located. And the BNSF serves that as well. And this is the BNS main line. I think it's called the Transcon, actually. That goes, I think this leads all the way from Chicago. I could be wrong, and feel free to correct me if I am. That goes all the way down. I think it goes to Texas, but it also splits off and goes all the way to California from this point. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not trying to give wrong information. I'm trying to pull this off the top of my head. But this area here is the tank car storage for the refinery. And then the refinery up to the north here is where they have multiple loading rack areas for different products at different points. And that's what I'm trying to represent on my layout. Is I'm using a single loading rack, but there's actually multiples. And then here on the south side of the refinery, here's that pet coke facility right there. And you can see, it's kind of dark, but you can see these are all open hoppers that are getting loaded with this pet coke, which basically looks like coal as far as I'm concerned. I couldn't tell you about how big the nodules are or whatever, but that's what that looks like. So that's basically a complete tour of the layout based on Google Earth and how I got those ideas. If anybody else has any tips for how they've used Google Earth to help generate ideas for their layout, please share those in the comments below. Otherwise, this video has gotten way out of control in terms of length, so I'm going to go ahead and shut it down now. But I hope that helps you gain a little bit of understanding about how I helped to design my layout using Google Earth. Thanks for watching, and have a great weekend.